Hello, my name is Francisca Darts, and this is Gus, which is short for Angus MacDonald. We both welcome you to Darts Hill Garden Park. Huh?
I expected just a small garden, which with a lot of compact plants in, but it was like an estate, you know. It was incredible how her and Ed just really on their own looked after that particular garden.
Francisca is well known throughout the gardening world, not just locally and not just Canadian, but American and European gardening world, for her knowledge and for her garden itself that she's created.
I mean, I have to laugh when I talk to people who work for, say, the Botanical Gardens at UBC or Van Dusen, and you ask if they have a certain plant, and they say, well, you know, we had it once, but it died. But Francisca has one. You know, if you want to see a 40-year-old specimen, and, you know, Darts Hill has it.
She really is a missionary when it comes to plants.
That's very far-sighted, and it always worries me that people always think of collections as being for one generation, and when in actuality they should be passed on.
In 1943, Ed and Francisca Darts were living in the city of Vancouver, British Columbia. On weekends, they'd leave the city and visit Ed's parents, who had retired to live in White Rock, a quiet seaside town south of Vancouver. It was during this time that they decided to move out of the urban bustle and find a place where they could build a home and plant a substantial orchard. They eventually found property in South Surrey, 2 miles north of the U.S. border, on a 7.5-acre south-facing slope in an area that enjoys a relatively mild environment due to its close proximity to coastal waters. From little acorns, great oaks grow. When the Darts first sighted the area in the 1940s, it had a sparse second-growth covering and huge stumps left over from a late 1800s logging operation. After a few years and much hard work, the orchard was progressing nicely. But off to the side, it was a vegetable garden that planted the seed of Francisca's life as a plantsman. She had little previous experience, but with her passion and thirst for knowledge, she went about learning through reading and joining garden clubs. Francisca received seeds from around the world, and over 50 years later, Darts Hill has evolved into a highly acclaimed plantsman's garden. This collection is particularly valuable as a study in plant maturity that only time can provide. Much to the benefit of future generations, Ed and Francisca have donated Darts Hill Garden to the City of Surrey to be held in trust and developed as a botanical garden with public access and an interpretation center.
We looked on the panorama ridge, and the view was beautiful, but it was too stony. We wanted to plant trees, you see, so we just happened to come down Meridian, and it was dusk. And it was beautiful. And we said, how did we ever miss this, you know? So we just slowly came down, and we saw this particular area, which had the trees on it, and a little old house, which is now gone. There were huge stumps, of course. You've seen pictures of them, I'm sure. And he would dig a tunnel, shall we say, underneath it, so that he could crawl in there. And then I would hand him the sticks of powder, and then he would come out with a line, and you'd light it, and then you'd start hollering, fire! But what used to scare me was when he'd say, oh, I think I need another 5 sticks. And I'd say, I hope you know what you're doing. I hope you know what you're doing, because this was new to him, new to me. And he didn't know much about blasting either, for that matter.
Well, we're going to clear this area, so Ed would get on the tractor and go out there, and he'd rip out the trees, and he'd level the land, and then Francesca would go in and say, well, I think that the bed is going to go here, and we'll plant that tree there and that tree there.
We did research on what we wanted, and we wanted Italian prunes, and we got 300 of them. And then we decided we'd go to all these lectures in town about fruit and this and that that the government had, and we had Gravenstein apples, and I've forgotten what apples we had. We had 50 apple trees anyway. We had pear trees, we had cherry trees, we had apricot trees, we had peach trees. You name it, we had it.
In the early days, the orchard was the focus of Darts Hill. They sold their crops through newspaper ads and to neighbors. Ed learned all he could about his trees through taking courses offered by the government on orchard management. He then began entering his fruit in competition at the Pacific National Exhibition in Vancouver.
Whatever fruit he had, and he had a 15-foot display all laid up, beautifully laid out. So later on, when after work we went to see what had finally happened, and here he had a gold medal for the only one that the peony has ever given out. So he was very proud of that. He should be too.
And though they were both very strong-minded, they seemed to get along beautifully, and they worked very, very hard at the garden. My, how they worked.
And of course, we mustn't forget Ed as well, her husband, who played an incredibly significant role in the construction and maintenance of the garden. You know, every good woman has a good man behind her, and vice versa. So they really were a superb partnership. So that should not be lost at all, is the fact that they worked together extremely well.
I used to be so envious, which is not a very nice thing to say, but to see a couple so happy and so devoted and so immersed in the same topic or whatever. It was a wonderful thing. You don't see it very often.
And then it was left up to me to take a parcel and dig it over and plant it and so on. And the paths as you see are out. I have to smile at myself because I would measure them out and stake them with long pegs and leave them that way on both sides, and leave them that way for a month, sometimes longer a month. Did I really like that curve? Did I really like the straight line? How was it in my eye? And you can't do that overnight.
You know, I recognize the time frame to achieve what Darts Hill has achieved. It's long and requires a remarkable eye for how things will develop, because it all started from very small material.
Francisca's remarkable eye was also matched by a strong love for learning. It began with reading all she could find on plants and gardening. The other key ingredient of her education was the experience of others.
Now, the Alpine Garden Club of British Columbia is the most knowledgeable club in British Columbia. When they talk plants, they talk Latin. You learn, and I knew nothing about horticulture. Oh, you know how to plant, what do you call it, annuals and stuff like that. Everybody had those, or geraniums, or what have you. But that's where I learned what horticulture was all about, because they weren't only, there were a lot of the old-timers there, and now too, but the old-timers, they were knowledgeable about plants of whatever variety, about trees, about shrubs, about you name it, but they were intensely interested in the alpines. And that is what started me on knowing about all these plants that you can grow. It opens your eyes.
She joined clubs for knowledge because she is an intensely curious woman.
One of them, of course, is the Royal Horticultural Society, which in those days you had to get a sponsor to join. And in those days you were able to get, they send you a seed list at the end of the year, and you were able to get, I think it's 80 packages of seed, free, for your, And it was wonderful. It's like a gift out of heaven.
And it was seeing her library that made me realize that you'd never know it all, but you could always turn somewhere to find out about anything you needed to know. So her library is very much a part of the garden.
Darts Hill is home to an extraordinary collection of plant material, which encompasses a large group of the rhododendron family, as well as a wide variety of unusual trees, shrubs, and perennials. Many of them are true species. Many push the hardiness boundaries of our temperate zone. A true heritage garden, one built with love over a large span of time. Perhaps the greatest value of this garden lies in its maturity.
The UBC Botanical Garden had put in a display of species rhododendrons, and there I saw the leaves, the gorgeous indimentum at the back, narrow leaves, curly leaves, you name it. I loved every one of them. You think I was nuts when I'm talking about leaves with such enthusiasm, but people, you know, you have a flower for how long? You've got the rest of the bush for the rest of the time. Why not have something that interests both?
A lot of what we're finding in garden centers tend to be hybrids or mislabeled, but hers are, in fact, the original species or the true species. That's a tremendous value for identification purposes.
I think people don't realize how significant the collection of plants is at Darts Hill. It's actually pretty astonishing.
She's tested the hardiness boundaries of so many plants, things that were considered totally ungrowable here. You know, she's tried them. Most of them have died if they're in that category, but some have come through and have proven to Vancouver gardeners that, well, you can grow that. And that's a great service. She's a remarkable lady.
And to have the opportunity to see labeled plant material that's mature is a benefit to me as a teacher, because then I can tell my students, or I can show my students what a particular cultivar looks like after 40 years.
We really hope that people can come and learn in this garden, that it'll be a source of educational inspiration. Take those who are professional gardeners or keen amateurs and let them learn more because of the interesting and unique collection of plants, and also to turn folks on to gardening for those that don't already have some expertise. They'll be inspired by what they see here, and they'll want to do likewise in their own gardens. So this will be a place of horticultural learning. It'll be a place of sensory experience of an extraordinary nature, and we're thrilled to have it here.
Gardeners get frustrated and they phone me and they bought an apple tree and it hasn't fruited yet, and they bought it, you know, in the fall and expect to have apples on it the next spring. Well, they should try growing magnolias. Some of those magnolias take 35 or more years before they reach an age where they can bloom. And so to have a mature garden like that is really, really special.
I've tried this, but it failed, and this is the reason, but don't worry about it, we'll just try again. She's never afraid of trying things more than once, probably 10 times sometimes.
She has so many things, some of which are still tucked away, and you would need several days to really go through the garden systematically. That's how big it is in terms of the total collection.
Any place that's set out where things are displayed beautifully with the collection of plants, it compares very favorably with any of our botanical gardens on a maybe just a slightly smaller scale, but there's nothing wrong with that because it makes it a very intimate garden.
My garden is a home garden enlarged, and when people come to see my garden, they feel more at home because they look at it and say, gee, I could grow that, I could do that.
Oh, it has the indelible stamp of a person. You go there and it just says Francisca and Ed Darts to you, particularly Francisca. And those are special gardens that we don't have here in Canada.
The fact that she plants